Hey, Chuck Dixon here with a special Halloween edition of Whatcha, Watchin. Thought I'd run down some of the scary movies that are available on a couple of the streaming services, and in some cases on more than one at a time, which I don't quite understand. Uh, anyway, let's go to HBO Max and start out with a horror series that I enjoy and I watch. I've watched a number of times, and before I introduce it, I'd like to say that I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I don't apologize for what I watch, what I read, what I like. If I like it, I must have a damn good reason, or I just like it. And you shouldn't either. You shouldn't never apologize for what you like. That said, Final Destination. These are movies I've watched repeatedly. To me, they're like salted peanuts. I watched the first one, and I got to watch the rest of them, except number 4. I've watched number 4 twice, and that was 3 times too many. If you've never heard of them, the Final Destination movies were originally proposed as an episode of The X-Files, which was rejected. And the two writers, Glenn Morgan and James Wong, decided, hey, you're wrong. This is a great idea. And they got themselves a feature film deal, which turned into its own franchise. The basic premise is centered around teenagers who are at an event or going on a trip or something. And it's a whole gaggle of teenagers together. And one of them has a vision, a very vivid vision of their demise, their grisly, bloody, violent demise. This causes that teenager to freak out and, exit the airplane, get off the roller coaster, pull off the highway, whatever, to avoid this horrible conflagration and vicious, visceral, horrible accident that's going to take hundreds of lives. And of course, when the teenager freaks out, a bunch of his friends and companions follow him out as well. And the event goes on without them, and basically they don't die when they were supposed to, and death is kind of pissed off. And generally, the cast members figure out that they were supposed to die with everybody else, and now death is after them, and generally after them in a particular order. So they have to die in the order that they were originally meant to die. And they can die in many, many various ways, usually involving sharp implements, household accidents, chemicals, fire, motor vehicles, whatever. The appeal of these movies, for me, as a writer, is the construction of the story. Yeah, it's basically the same movie every time, but it's a good formula and it works. Especially if you've got a good cast, playing it earnestly. And, for some reason, well, probably because teenagers are the largest audience for these movies, they hire a bunch of teenagers. And teenagers are, they're good grift for a good, I don't mean to say grift. They're good grist for a horror film because they're self-involved, pretentious, and they take everything way too seriously. And so they're the perfect horror movie victims. In these movies, they're usually got a more thoughtful bunch as they try to figure it out. The audience is way ahead of them, of course, but they figure out that death is a real thing, a sentient thing, and it's after them. And the movies work because of the setups. The setups are always very clever as to how each character meets their demise. Often death offering multiple scenarios, and a little bit of luck's involved, but eventually death's going to win, and that's what we know. And so part of the appeal is that these are all everyday accidents. That every one of these deaths is something that could happen to any one of us at any time. A fall in a bathtub. Electrocution, car accidents, all kinds of things that could happen to us in everyday life. So these movies kind of stick with you after you've watched them. You're a little creeped out at your own kitchen, your own bathroom. Next time you get in the car, you're thinking about, the terrible things that happen to these teenagers in the movies. And the series is generally well constructed throughout, except, as I said, number four. Avoid number 4. It's a lower budget. They tried to cut the budget and cut the intelligence level of the movies as well. And yeah, they're pure exploitation. But as I said, I'm not going to apologize for that. It's what they are. But I like how the writers take the formula and play with it. In some of the later films, they play with it for humor. There's a really just laugh out loud funny sequence in, I think, number 5. Could be number 3. I don't know. I get them confused. I just think of them as the airplane movie, the roller coaster movie, the bridge movie, the highway accident movie. Good cast, solid direction, smart writing. Are they melodramatic? Yes. But if you've ever been around teenagers or been a teenager, teenagers are melodramatic. Now, on to a franchise I like even more, The Conjuring. Conjuring franchise, the Conjuring universe, all the rest of it. I've talked about this in Ask Chuck Dixon videos, my unending admiration for what these movies accomplish. And there's been 3 basic Conjuring movies and then a whole bunch of spin-offs. And they're available primarily on HBO, although a couple of them are still available on Netflix simultaneously, which you got to wonder how that happened. If you've never seen the Conjuring films, they're about basically a married couple whose job is to be, lay exorcists for the Catholic Church, the Warrens, and they're based on a real couple who used to show up on late night television to talk about the spooky stuff that they encountered. And yeah, I'm very much aware that they were probably a pair of con artists, but it doesn't matter because the stories they told are compelling, whether true or not, and they make for great fodder for horror films. It's a married couple, they're exorcists, they run into haunted houses and demonic possession and werewolves and spooky dolls and, witches and just all kinds of craziness. And it's all the usual horror movie tropes and everything else. But what makes these films great, and I mean great, separates them from the pack and makes them so hugely successful. These are enormously successful movies. I mean, 1,000% profit over negative cost on these flicks because they're not expensive to make, but there's quality there. But what makes it is Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga as the Warrens, and the way they're written and the way it's acted. They're completely earnest. You just fall in love with this couple. And the stories are generally set in the 70s, as you can see, and which gives it kind of a feeling of its own too. There's a reality to these series, an internal logic to them, but they clearly take place in a real world, a world that we can all relate to. And the Warrens are so indefatigable and so filled with the faith that what they're doing is right and that they are saving mankind from these horrors from their, little bi-level suburban home. And, each film is different. It's differently plotted. They don't, the filmmakers wisely just don't stick to a formula or remake each film. Each film isn't a remake of the last film. And they are seriously creepy. There's everything, there's the spooky stuff, there's the don't go in there moments, there's the jump scares, but they're all so well constructed. And at the heart of it is the fact that you care about these characters. You worry about them. You're very concerned with them. They're not stupid. They're problem solvers. But, they'll go into dangerous situations willingly, but not without being aware of the dangers they're in. And also there's a feeling that these supernatural events that they encounter as part of their profession are taking a toll on them, both as individuals, but never as a couple, because they are loyal to each other to the end. And that's kind of refreshing in a horror film. Horror films tend to be nihilistic, and these movies aren't. They're kind of inspiring. And you feel good after you've watched it. You can watch all these horrible, terrible supernatural goings on, but you still feel good when the film is over. And I think primarily that's because good wins out. And more specifically, Jesus wins out. Religious faith the tenets of Christianity, the tenets of Western civilization, they win out over whatever spooky critter the Warrens run up against. And they're feel-good horror movies. You get all the scares and everything else, but you don't feel leaving crappy about yourself. Oh, now of the spin-offs, some of them are worthy, some of them aren't. The only one I really would recommend is Annabelle Comes Home, which I can't find available for free on any streaming service. Annabelle Comes Home has the Warrens in it. It's very much tied into the events of the other three films, but it's got a feel all its own. It's kind of like dessert after the full meal of the other three films. And I've watched this one as often as I've watched the rest of the Conjuring films, and I highly recommend it. The other Annabelle films, they're fun, but they're not as tied into the continuity or as cleverly presented as this one is. This one sort of more relates to the ongoing events in the Conjuring universe. Now let's move over to Netflix, which oddly also has the first two Conjuring films. There's a series at Netflix which did not get a lot of attention, and it is a horror series. It's called La Revolution. It's a French series, and it's something to behold. It's a huge production, big budget, which is probably why it didn't get a second season. And it is a series. I believe there's 10 episodes. And it takes the story of the French Revolution, and instead of telling an alternate history, it tells you the secret history of the French Revolution. They don't vary from the facts of what led up to, the days before the Bastille was stormed and everything else. They pretty much stick to history as much as any drama can. But what they provide is a supernatural backstory for the French Revolution that kind of explains why it happened and how it happened. That there's this conspiracy amongst the noblemen that the peasants react to, and it has horror elements to it. And the cool thing about it is, as I said, it's not an alternate history; it's a secret history. The series has real historical figures in it and everything else, and explains using this new theory, this new supernatural theory, which I won't reveal because it would spoil it. They sort of explain different things about the French Revolution, why they occurred this way. It's just brilliantly done, and it's terrifically acted. It's a gorgeous looking series, and historical detail and everything else. And again, I like my horror movies to take place in a real world. They very much establish a real world. There's a lot of daylight horror scenes in this movie, take place in full sunlight. They don't go spooky, spooky, spooky all the time. They don't rely on that. And there's some frightening stuff. There's a lot of action. But it's very much classic horror film. It's very much a classic horror film, it goes along with the period that it's set in. But there's a lot of cool stuff here, a lot of awesome visuals. And sadly, there's not a second season, but the first season is worth watching. There's a complete story, so you're not, left hanging at the end. But it's quite the series, and I recommend you checking it out. I mean, it's going to be on Netflix forever, but they're not going to recommend it much anymore. I find that as these Netflix series age, they don't recommend them so much. So this one's kind of it's going to get lost in the shuffle, and it shouldn't. It's worth checking out. I've saved the best for last, also on Netflix. It's a horror film out of Germany called Blood Red Sky. And I don't want to spoil anything, because I went into this movie completely cold, and it's the best way to enjoy it. But, if you just read the teaser, it's a horror film that takes place on an airplane, a transatlantic flight. But I won't reveal the elements or anything else. But I will say that it's not only the best horror film I've seen in a long time, it's the best movie I've seen, I think, in the last couple of years. It's perfectly constructed, perfectly acted. The reveals are terrific. The twists and turns are fantastic. This movie delivers on every single level. My wife, who is not a horror film fan, loved this movie. She was recommending it to everybody because it's just a damn good story. But as I said, I don't want to reveal the MacGuffin or the gimmick that makes this movie work. But it's got an ensemble cast of very effective characters, well drawn characters that you really begin to care about. Which, as I said before, in the other reviews, that's at the heart of a horror film. I mean, a horror movie doesn't work if you don't give a damn about the characters who are in jeopardy. So, strongly recommend Blood Red Sky, currently on Netflix, on Netflix forever. So that's it for me this week, or this special. Except to say, check out My Sister Suprema. It's a brand new digital series that just dropped earlier this week. It's by me and Anthony Gonzalez Clark. It's a superhero parody. It's about a little boy who wants to be a superhero, but his sister gets the powers instead. Sibling rivalry comedy. Go to archaven.com and look for it on ArcTunes. It's free. It's digital. It's high res. It's free. Okay. So anyway, that's it for me. Check out those scary movies if you haven't already, and have a happy Halloween.